Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your phones and hush your babies. The show is about to start.
I offer my personal welcome to this
Nemo
and Cole Conference
halftime
show.
Gets me every time. Welcome everyone to the Nemo & Co conference halftime show. Number 2 out of 5. I'm okay. I'm okay so far. We're doing well. Welcome. And we'll get straight to it. Who have I got with me? I've got the ladies from 21st Century Saints.
Hey.
Hi, say hi to the people.
Hi. Hi to
What
the
a
people.
session that was, huh?
Thrill a minute. If you weren't listening to that last session, whoa, did you sure miss something huge?
Yeah, something, right? Yeah, your thoughts, Ruth?
I just want to wash my brain out with Dettol. Ugh. Just what a load of garbage. Sorry, am I being too nuanced?
It was a little bit of nonsense.
It really was. There was some really good key things that ran through it, and I'm sure you'll have pulled them all out as well. But I feel like I've been really gaslit throughout the whole thing. And I'm trying to hold space for old believing me, but crikey, I think even she would have called bullshit on this session and stomped out at some point throughout it. But there we go.
Fair enough. Right. Let's crack on. Es wieder da is a name of a great German film, but it means he is back again, which is odd. Who could be back? Well, let's have a look, shall we?
Elder Gary E. Stevenson of the Quorum
So this
of the
is what
12
I'd
Apostles
predicted.
will conduct this session.
Gary E. Stevenson conducting a session, which is different, a bit weird. But you know, the doddery folks of the First Presidency are struggling. Here he is.
Brothers and sisters, we welcome you to the Saturday afternoon session of the 194th Annual General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. President Russell M. Nelson has asked me to conduct this session.
What's he doing in the building? Look at him.
And
he's not meant to be there.
Look how happy he is.
I thought
It's
he
all
was pulling a
CGI.
sickie.
It's all CGI. He's not really there.
I thought he was pulling
he's
a
an AI
sickie.
prophet.
No, he was meant to be at home. Why is he there now? Did he get too much FOMO? Is he like, oh no, I can't not be there and feel the adulation in person? So he heard how much they were sort of adoring him in the first session. Speaking of which, what am I doing? Why have I not? What, guys? Time for Jesus Joel Russell. Jesus has just crept into the double digits now. But Russell and Nelson's still ahead by 5. So Jesus has halved the gap between them. There was a 10-point gap-ish between them. Something like that last time. I don't even remember. But Russell's still in the lead. Thanks primarily to the winner of the PBK award, our good friend Cook. Quinton L. Cook wins his PBK award, which is the award named by Doug Vincent, who you'll see in the chat, as the Prophet Butt Kisser Award. So the person who chummies up to Russell M. Nelson the most and quotes him the most. Anyway, sorry, we normally do Jesus Joel Russell right at the top, but it's getting late, so I hate to think how badly the one later is going to go. I've not started on the caffeine yet, though, so when the caffeine kicks in, it should be great.
Can I give you a jammy dodger?
Oh, you can give me a jammy dodger. Hang on.
Go for it.
But
we're ever such a small country, aren't we? So if I stretch it across like that, and you, you got one?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Speak, Nemo, quick. Go.
So over to the Ruth show, and David A. Bednar was the first person to speak, and
Do you know there's quite a
How
bit
to
of
shut
tune in
up?
those little
How
guys.
to
Yeah.
shut up Nemo while
Mhm.
he's quiet. Let's all say, if you're liking the show, please hit like, please subscribe, and if you feel the need late on a Saturday evening, certainly in the UK, feel the need to validate the efforts made by Nemo for his services, then in a monetary way, feel free to do that as well.
I approve this message. Thank you very much. No, let's go to Bednar though, because Susan's husband started us off this session. As we all know, that's his official name, and he didn't give us much. He gave us the first graphics that we saw in conference this year. This is our first set of graphics, and it's lovely. It explains firm foundations and what foundations are, and that Jesus is the rock, and the foundation is the firm thing we build, and then we're on top of it. So there's more steps than just building your house upon rock, sand, or whatever the other third option in the primary song is. I don't remember. Anyway, or is there only two? There's usually three. These things usually come in threes. But anyway, we got our first graphics. But other than that, he kind of just did a sort of Bednar thing. He did seem to call out those who are staying at home and watching on Zoom. He was kind of like, leaving our homes to worship on the Sabbath and in the house of the Lord certainly is essential. Basically,
Yeah.
pandemic's over, people. Stop watching on Zoom and actually go to church, please.
I think we both me and Rich, as we sat watching, both called bullshit at the same point, which is when he was talking about his interaction with those journalists in the temple walk around. He's showing them around, and he's telling them, we're going to go into the celestial room, and then you're all going to be silent, and you're all going to do this, you're all going to do that, and then this journalist says, that's the most peace silence I've ever felt in my life. And I just thought, well, that's just rubbish. Absolute
He's clearly
rubbish.
never been in an anechoic chamber before, has he?
Yeah.
Well, I think though, Ruth, that's bull. That I agree. But I think that's a very relatable type. We have all seen this happen. Just for context, I have been very invested in trying to get as much out of this positively as I possibly can, because the previous session really did affect me in pretty profound ways. So I've been working really hard on this, and I can't believe I'm saying this. I loved Elder Bednar's talk. It's not
Oh my
perfect, but
goodness.
compared to what he would normally say, this was on a whole other level.
It felt
right?
tame for him, sure. Yeah.
Oh, it absolutely did. Now, what he does here, exactly, starting with the journalists, I remember having, whenever members will talk about interactions with non-members, and I think they really believe that people are way more invested or touched in their heart about what they're saying than actually. Now, I remember being at a funeral, and someone during some comments from the bishop at the time had called out "Amen" from the congregation, which, if you're a Mormon, is unheard of. We don't do that. And so, but later on, there were sort of comments about it, but can you believe it? Now, by the time he's repeated this story about a month later, the person is so excited, they've jumped out of their seat and they've called "Amen." And we all thought that was pretty good, but isn't it a bit quirky? I think the same thing's happening here. If journalists are going to a spiritual site and they exist all over the world, silence can be part of that. Silence often is part of that. It's equated with sacred space and sacred time. And he does a really good job of talking about those two things. And for me, this is the mindfulness talk. This is the one that if you're going to cover this in future meetings, that I would say this is the healthiest one to talk about.
Wow. So I didn't take that. I took away from that the whole silencing of people's opinions, silencing of people's literal voices in the Mormon space right now. And here he is silencing people who have questions. And isn't that, a journalist goes there to ask questions and to find out information. They are going there not as faithful members, they're going there to be told about the church. And here's somebody in a position of power and authority literally silencing them before they have an opportunity to have questions, and controlling when and where they can ask their questions. And that is toxic. And I think as well, when he started off I thought it was ironic that they started off with that picture of the Salt Lake Temple, I believe it was the Salt Lake Temple, covered in scaffolding, because they're having problems with their literal foundations and they're having to rebuild the darn thing. And
Yeah.
and then we have this talk about this smug talk about how we're building on the rock of Jesus Christ. And I have a big problem with that as an analogy anyway, because we are not real estate. I know the church as a corporation invests in real estate, but we are not bricks and mortar. And actually, as organic creatures, we'd be better off suited to be putting down roots and having fertile soil. And in nature, there is always noise. There is trees rustling, there is the sound of the wind, there's the sound of the sea, there's the sound of bird song, whatever it is. So silence is actually, I think, quite a toxic thing to aim for. What we should aim for is the sounds of nature, the sounds of a baby giggling. That there's so many beautiful sounds that aren't necessarily disruptive sounds, but that are beautiful sounds that remind us that we're alive. And I just found him so toxic.
So I think you're absolutely right, and I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying. I think what the healthy version of this message is, you're talking about silence. I'm hearing stillness. And there's a lot of times where he comes back to, he does mention stillness a few times. Again, this is where sort of I was able to hold on to this thing that reminds me of mindfulness. When we are in sort of a progressive Mormon space or ex-Mormon space, unless you are completely comfortable in church, we achieve this state of hypervigilance where we're just constantly, I mean, all of us, right? We're waiting for the gut punch every conference, and they come and then we're fine. And being able to take ourselves within ourselves to a place of stillness is a very healthy thing to be able to do. When he starts equating us to buildings. Now, let's face it, this comes up in the New Testament as well. So the analogy is a valid one, but what we have the privilege of doing is pulling them apart to see where they work and where they stop working.
Yeah.
And it stops working in this situation. You're right. Buildings lose ability to stability over time. And whereas something organic can gain strength over time. And there's a whole host of reasons. And actually, I think there's been conference talks about how that becomes possible. He makes it very clear that with a building, the pins that are securing the structure to the bedrock being Christ, that's covenants. And I want to
Covenants was a
reject that.
theme throughout the whole of conference,
Right.
wasn't
Oh
it?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how comfortable I feel with the pins or the covenants idea, because if we focus on the organic, we just are. We just if it's a Christian path, which he's making it very clear, this is the correct path is Christianity, then that happens organically. We already are
And
God's.
the issue I have with those sorts of metaphors, and it's the same issue I had with, I think it was Renland who did the tying up the wrists and how those are covenant ties. And there's this idea, and I think either a talk that's just gone or a talk last session also talked about pinning us to foundations and things like that. Covenants tie us in. So, someone's clearly trying to get on the Bednar train. But that idea of being held captive to something, I think, is much worse than the idea that I kind of grew up with, which was being yoked with Christ. It's this kind of partnership where he's taking on, you're kind of bound together in a common purpose rather than being bound to him and then stuck in one position. I think those are different ways of looking at covenant relationships, and one seems to be healthier than another because one very much indicates don't you dare go anywhere.
Yeah.
And one seems to indicate, okay, we're going to go somewhere together, and we're going to go on a journey together.
And I think that's the problem that I have with equating it to covenants, is because there is a natural sort of, I love sacred space, sacred time. Are we having whether we're having that in our homes and with our homes, returning to so many traditions have different ways of marking and closing sacred time, and entering sacred space and leaving sacred space. It's beautiful, but if we keep tying that to the fact that it's pinning us down and it's tying us. I would have loved to have seen Elder Bednar's talk go in the direction of, it could have been about earth stewardship. It could have been about this connection that we have to each other, to God, to the earth. It could have been very nurturing. So while I think this is the mindfulness talk and the sort of, I think there's a lot of healthy things I can bring out of it, it's still a Bednar talk. It's still an Elder Bednar talk.
And I think that's really charitable of you to try and find good in it. However, I think you are straining to try and find good in something because you want to find good in it, and that's wonderful. That's you, because you're a good person. But you're not spending 2 hours of your Saturday evening trying to find good in another church's teachings or whatever. We shouldn't have to wring the last drops of goodness out of something that's carries a lot of dross to, do you know what I mean, to have a relationship with
Yeah.
a message that's been in the New Testament for 2000 years. So
Yes.
he isn't adding anything of value or new to a message that all Christian faiths would talk about, and most primary schools in the UK will sing that song on a semi-regular basis because it's a good action song.
Yes,
So
and I do want
he's
to
not bringing
point
anything
out
new.
though, because Ruth, I think you're going to say this a few times about and that's why I made my sort of, nailed my colours to the mast quite early.
Yeah.
I am seeking for this, and
I
there's a
know.
bit of a story arc that sort of by the end of this conference, yes, we'll fill you in.
Okay, should we look at Elder Defo, who's the president of the Europe Central Area Presidency? He was over us before we got Europe North because Russia invaded Ukraine, and then the church got a revelation that they needed to readjust the Europe area boundaries, and they've basically stuck they've stuck Russia, Belarus in the Europe East area, and then Ukraine and Moldova are kind of being like administered specially from Salt Lake with help from a Ukrainian Area 70. So yeah, anyway, that happened a couple of years ago.
It did,
But
but
Elder Defeo is
we don't talk
familiar.
about it as a church, do we? We don't
No,
talk
we
about
don't.
the fact that there's a massive conflict going on.
No, someone did talk about
Parts of the world.
wars
Yes, they did.
at some point, but yes, we'll get to
Yeah.
that. So Elder Defeo, he goes on telling us this story about how he's going to lose his vision, and like that's pretty scary stuff, right? And then he's like, but anyway, I thought, my physical sight's not so good, but what about my spiritual vision? And it's just something about the phrase, what about? Do I need any treatment? It's like, well, hang on. No, I want to finish the story about the treatment you need on your physical sight first. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was just like an overly sort of emotional segue. It's like he used it's a weird story to use to get to this place. Does that make sense?
Absolutely does. And it also seems a little bit weird to then go into great detail about how a blind man was healed by faith on the Savior, but yet he's going to go for monthly injections for the rest of his life and
Yeah.
lean very heavily not on the Savior but on scientific and
Modern
medical
medicine.
care and modern medicine. Yeah. So which one is because the person he was giving the story about had a physical sight problem,
Mm-hmm.
but spiritually was able to gain relief from that problem, whereas he's saying, yeah, I've got a physical problem, but I'm not taking that one to the Savior.
Yeah.
I'm good with the doctors and my very good health care that comes with being
Injections.
a high
Yeah.
up in the church. Yeah.
And could I maybe just give a
Please,
little
yeah.
bit of a tutorial for how we talk about people with different aspects of their abilities? If it's not relevant, then it's not relevant. Now, if you're telling a story and you want to take an illness and make it about the spiritual version of that illness, or the same with a disability, but here's what we can really learn, and we'll do either two things. We'll make you a hero, someone who's pedestalized and fetishized and all of those things, or we'll just draw all of these parallels with what's going on with your actual body and mental health, and we'll turn that into some kind of parable. When you meet someone, as we have learned, we don't need to talk about, what this person's color was, what gender it's not relevant. You can make these points without talking about someone's physical barriers and mental barriers. It's very, very ableist, and it's a very common conference theme. We bring death right into it too, and we're going to keep on seeing that happen throughout this, not just this talk, but other talks too. This is the trials talk, and let's use that by talking about someone with disabilities. Please don't.
I've muted myself. There we go. But then, he talks about how the voices of the world are trying to silence us, but that's why we must declare our testimony of Savior louder and stronger. It's like, who's
what
trying
that's
to
like.
silence you?
Exactly. Who do you mean?
I'm not trying to silence you. I'm actually encouraging you to speak because I'm giving a platform to your words by commentating on them. Like, no one's saying stop speaking. Maybe asking you to be a bit more honest, but
maybe it's an oblique reference to Instagram hiding their comments. Maybe that's what it is.
Maybe
because they kind of tried to silence.
It was the world that did it. It wasn't the church hiding their comments. It
was Meta. The voices of the world, Meta, are trying to silence members by deleting the comments.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I'm trying to be positive. Right. I accept this version. Next.
Exactly. It's this persecution narrative, which we've had from the get-go in Mormonism. The voice of the world are trying to silence us. No, they're not. No, they're not. We're amplifying your voice. You might not like the things we're saying about it, but we are amplifying it. So
supposing it was, this is what frustrates me, right? Supposing it was true, and he's actually, he's probably experienced marginalization on some level, as so many people of color are. Right, we know that's what happens, and that is awful. And everyone here, people in the comments, all of us here, we have all experienced it, and it's horrible. And if you're being silenced, we're going to stand together and we're going to do something about that. So, and unfortunately, yours isn't the voice that needs amplified right now. There are particular issues and situations that do need amplified. So let's hear you talk about that, please.
Yeah. But no, he won't. He'll instead say that people are making excuses and feeling sorry for themselves and feeling sorry about their circumstances. And they're feeling sorry for themselves about the bad people that we think make us unhappy. No, bad people can just make you unhappy. And they can be very good at it. And there's not really a lot you can do about it sometimes other than to try and extract yourself from the situation. But no. That's your fault for keeping the beggar's coat on your shoulders. Yeah, that's bizarre.
It's worth mentioning. And like I say, I'm coming at this from a sort of ableist and thinking a lot about disabilities. There are other things that are obviously hugely important, but this is sort of my vulnerability at the moment. And when you're talking about people's ability to make choices, it undermines the fact that actually people's choices, along with their life circumstances, socioeconomic background, ethnic background, they dramatically change. Everyone does not have the same access to the same choices that everyone else does. There is,
even though Cook will later go on to say that all those things don't matter and everyone gets to be baptized, and isn't that wonderful?
Even though we will get to that stuff. When you're talking about because he's just started talking about disabilities, and he's using this parable. What is it? The cloak of, what does he say? The cloak of
the beggar's coat.
The beggar's coat, and he talks about letting go of that, and it's very symbolic of someone who isn't able to trust or let go of their life circumstances. Now, there's absolutely times when, of course, that is a very valid point, but when you have learned to have trust issues, when you have experienced abuse, when you've experienced financial hardship, when the person that you're speaking to is not Jesus Christ, it's an organization which you're reaching out to for help, and you are used to being overlooked or neglected, then to just get rid of your cloak leaves you extremely vulnerable. We can't do that, or it's not safe. And when women, by the time women are having women during pregnancy, every baby increases the likelihood that the mother is going to experience postnatal depression. The amount of children who are considered to be at risk and statistically are at risk of abuse but have no ability to have someone work with them to create a plan to support them, that varies by socioeconomic background. And so to just sort of say, well, look, we have to stop feeling sorry for ourselves. We could if we were safe. And I think that's the thing and from Elder Bednar to this one, if we're walking into sacred space, sacred time, but we ultimately don't feel safe, we're going to feel judged, and we're going to feel like if we ask for financial, emotional, or spiritual help, that we're going to be told it's our fault, and now it's our fault for not trusting that we're going to get that response. That is unacceptable. Now, I actually don't think that's the point of what he was trying to say, because I do think there is a healthier point in there that he's trying to make. However, that's how many people will experience it.
I think because that's informed by many people's experience of the church being blamed by the church constantly for not being good enough, etc. Ruth, what are your thoughts on this talk before we move on to?
I just thought it was an interesting analogy to use that particular story and try and link it to his own current health concern or recent health concern. I just thought it was a little bit of a tone deaf thing to do. It feels a little bit like victim blaming when you're saying to people who have valid reasons for saying, I'm struggling, I'm finding this hard, to say, well, you just need to trust in the Saviour a bit more, and you just need to be at church, and you just need to covenant path, all of those normal things, and blame people for coming up with what he considers to be excuses. They're not excuses, they're explanations, and they're explanations of people's lived experience, and that experience can change, but people need to explain why they feel the way they do, why they've acted the way they've acted, and then feel truly supported to be able to trust the organization to actually be there for them. I've seen a ton of stuff recently on Reddit where and on TikTok as well, where people have been very, very let down by the church as an organization when they have been completely all in. There's one chap who was a missionary and had serious health issues on his mission, was hugely let down, and his family let down. And I just said this sort of story in counterbalance to those things flying around in my head at the moment just make me angry, because I feel like you're going to have fantastic healthcare for the rest of your life. And hopefully you won't lose your sight, but maybe you will. And even if you do, you will not be out of a job. You will be absolutely financially fine. Whereas we've got missionaries who are literally putting their lives on the line, and their health on the line, and their long-term health on the line, to serve because they feel like that's what they should be doing, and they're faithful, and the church leaves them hanging in the wind. And that makes me really angry.
Yeah, no, I get that. And there are missionaries that die in service.
Yeah,
it does unfortunately happen. But it's all okay, because we're going to hear from Brent Nielsen now, who I think was he, a lawyer? Probably. Yeah, he was.
There's lots of lawyers, wasn't there?
Lots of lawyers in this session, because Cook's a lawyer too, and he talks about, when I was at law school doing the California bar exam or whatever, which is like, all right, cool. Cook's whole talk is a humble brag, but we'll come to that as and when we get to it. But yes, Nielsen, before I get my quotes, just overviews, thoughts.
So I think this was a really interesting one, because it did this theme of lawyers was an interesting one, and it may have been undeliberate, not on purpose. However, Brent Nielsen made a point of setting out what a witness is and what a testimony is, and I've jotted it down. Facts are what people have witnessed. The witness will testify to what they have seen and what they have heard. It's actual things. Now, later on throughout this session, we have people saying, I testify, and it's very nebulous, and it's not what they've seen or what they've actually they themselves seen or heard. It's what they feel.
Yeah,
how they feel about things, and it's that sleight of hand that we see going on. And these are lawyers as well that are that are using that word, I testify, knowing full well that Brent has spelt out what, as a lawyer, to testify means. And I just feel like it was a little bit sleight of hand.
Yeah, well, I think this here exemplifies it perfectly, because he says, it didn't take long for me to realize that the very same terms I was using every day as a lawyer were also the terms I used in my gospel conversations. but he doesn't specify, and he won't go on to state that they have very different definitions in the two situations. Witness and testimony are terms that we use as we share our knowledge and feelings. Feelings being the word that does a lot of the lifting in that sentence, about the truthfulness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay, well, you may feel it's true, but knowledge, that's a very different thing altogether. And yeah, like you said, he talks about people under oath testified of the truthfulness of what they're both seen and heard. He will go on to talk about how he's testifying of it's never been a better time to be a member of the church because he's seen the rising generation do impressive things, or he's heard about XYZ. And I get that. But then he will, like you said, as a lawyer, knowing that definitions matter, start to say, I witnessed this or I testify that. And it's like, actually, you can't by the definitions you set out.
Yeah.
Jane, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
This will
You
be
can be
quite
nice to
brief.
him.
He was a sweetheart. You all have to stop it and go fix yourself. Sunday's coming. So yeah, he was very sweet, but this is what I think about all of the talks today. They were very sweet, but he said something about following Jesus, not following what man says. I kind of like that. I would love to see a bit more of that in action. He's also said, this was weird, this is the best time to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in history.
I just wrote, why now?
What? I
What
don't
is it
know if
about
you've
now?
read any Mormon history, but I think he maybe means that it's academically easier. You don't have to do scripture mastery, memorize what temples look like. We have more temples than ever before, but it was leaning into the church is growing, which we're all now extremely clear that it's not. So, but then he starts talking about sort of, people on the other side of the veil. So maybe he's feeling really good because he's counting those numbers. But this was my literal main capital letters note from this talk is just with lots of question marks. So I'll let you guys take that from here.
That's right. Here's the next one. So he said, I testify based upon what I've both seen and heard that there's never been a better time to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ than today. Again, why today? What is it that qualifies that? I think what he goes on to share then, as far as he's concerned, qualifies that because he repeats this statement at the end. So I think that's his qualifier. But this is a really weird sentence, particularly for a lawyer. Ruth, should we break this down? I know this of my own knowledge, independent of any other source, because I've both seen and heard. That's really weirdly worded, isn't it?
Very, very strange. Yeah. Very strange. Independent of any other source. I know this right out of my brain, not looking at anything else, not listening to anybody else, but based on what I've seen and heard, but not looking at any other sources, but what I've seen and heard. It's just bonkers, isn't it? And he's a lawyer, or he was a lawyer. He's not now, is he?
Which I think this is telling people to not examine evidence external, just rely on what
Trust
you
on
see and
me.
hear yourself.
Yeah.
And even the personal message to people, just look at what you see and hear. Don't care about other people's lived experiences, their thoughts, their evidences. It's ultimately going to be about what you see and hear. That's the most important thing. That's what makes you a witness. And it's just weird.
Yeah, and he's going to testify that it's the best time ever to be a member. Okay, for you, but you want me to know for myself, and I'm telling you it's not. So and all of those women on Instagram were telling the church, active believing members were telling the church, it's not that great a time to be a female member of this church.
And
But
the
are they
church is
listening?
going to change over the years. It will, because imagine someone saying this in 1970 in the church. A guy like him saying that it is now, there's never been a better time. He's not saying it's the best time, but he's saying previously there's never been a better one. We're at the current best one. 1970, you might
Tomorrow
say
it'll be
that as
better.
a straight white dude.
Yeah.
But then 1978, late 1978, all of a sudden, well, there has certainly never been a better time to be a black member of the church than right then.
Yeah.
And then whatever changes the church makes on its stance on LGBTQ marriages or whatever that is, right? Then all of a sudden, it'll be, well, there's never been a better time to be a member of the church if you're gay, because all of a sudden, people, your sexual orientation is better accepted now, or whatever that looks like. So it's such a moving target.
Yes.
There's never
Yes,
been a
it's
better time. Okay, cool. Well, but
it's
there,
very wishy-washy, and for a lawyer, he should know better.
and it's looking backwards. It's not looking forwards. I
Yeah.
guess is the point I'm trying to make. It's like, oh well, compared to how it used to be, it's great. I'm like, yeah, but it could be better. And I know you don't want people thinking about ways in which the church could be better, but it could be better for people. So that's just my thoughts on that.
So I also thought he talked about the gathering of Israel on the other
Mhm.
side of the veil.
He did, yeah.
I don't
When
know
it
if you
comes
can
to the
pick that
gathering
one.
of Israel on the other side of the veil, there has never been a better time to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ. That's they say.
Yeah,
it's the
see,
same
the
thing.
church is growing. See?
The church is growing, but again, nothing we can measure because who knows how many of them are saying yes to it and
Well,
how
no,
many
but
of
he
them are
gave us
duplicates. And
He did
he
give
gave us a
a
solid number here because he talks about missionaries baptize over 20,000 people every month. That's the church's current growth rate, apparently.
He gave us the number of, what did he say? Did he say 1 million records are added to Family Search every day?
Yeah,
I'm sure it was 1 million, and
Yeah.
someone can correct me if I'm wrong. And so if your ancestor's name isn't there today, check back tomorrow.
yes, that is what he said. Yeah,
So if that's what growth is, then church is totally growing.
compared to then, he made the blanket statement: the Church of Jesus Christ is experiencing tremendous growth in Africa. Said nothing more, but then talked about missionaries baptizing 20,000 people every day all over the globe. So every month, sorry. So that
he
240, no, yeah, 240,000 people a year. Is
he
that enough
talked
to
about
keep up
it
with population growth? Sorry.
penetrating every continent as well.
Hmm.
And straight away, I was thinking, Antarctica? Really? Are we going there?
The
But
McMurdo mission.
yeah.
Yeah.
But he also then uses phrases like Europe, and I'm thinking 50 odd countries, Africa, 50 plus countries. You know,
Mhm.
can we stop as a church in Utah? Can we stop saying Africa like it's a place? It's a continent. It's a whole continent with so many different nations and history
Languages
and
and yeah.
languages and cultures and interlocking and that it it's insulting and it just sounds so backwards. So for a church that considers itself to be a worldwide church, you make yourself look really stupid by saying things like Europe and Africa when you're talking about
Oh, but
very different diverse cultures and
didn't you listen
countries
to
and
how well traveled he
experiences.
is? Didn't you listen to how well traveled he is at the beginning when he was telling us all about his lovely assignments that he got to do on the church's dime?
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll stop being so jaded.
Stop winding me up because I will start getting nasty.
It's getting late. Anyway, right, let's go on to this chappie because this chappie, I think, gave a really quite nice Christ-centered talk. Quite lovely, actually. I thought.
Quite lovely.
Jane, your thoughts?
Sweet. It was all sweet. Actually, what was really good about this is he starts his talk talking about, well, not talking about really, just giving a list of some of the biggest issues of the day: unemployment, abuse, war, loneliness. Then talking about divine peace. It would be lovely if we could get to grips with the fact that actually, as a massive community with a massive amount of resources, we could talk about a more sort of non-divine, but like the more daily living type of peace that we could achieve in the world, because there's a lot of good that could be done. However, he focuses on divine peace, quotes a lot of Jesus, and again, I have no notes on this because it was just sweet. I didn't. What isn't here? But by the time I get to this talk, and I think the next one too, I'm very aware that you're just reading scriptures at me, which is not in itself a bad thing, but
No.
we're all quite familiar and these stories are always presented like they're the first time we're hearing them. They're very earnest, and it's really hard to sort of stay engaged when it's bringing us back to the we can't graduate from primary thing, right? We know this now. We're looking to hear what you think, and what as a leader of this organization we can actually do as a people to resolve some of these issues. So yeah, it was sweet.
So, I mean, that's an interesting point, Jane, because for some people, this might be their first experience of conference. If we are baptizing 20,000, however many a month, maybe for some people, this is their first experience of conference, and that loaves and fishes story, it's refreshing to hear it from, a 70. However, when he's then linking that in the beginning with, particularly, my light goes on when it says the word abuse. And when we know what the church's history is with abuse, and when we know what their ongoing battle is to stop bishops reporting, to stop having any sort of moral obligation to intervene when they know there's abuse going on within families, within leaderships, leaders in positions of authority. They will throw money at not having to be part of the solution to those problems. So then when you have the loaves and the fishes story, where literally a child, in my recollection of the story, a child gives all that they have, their loaves, their fishes, and it is shared amongst everybody. They don't hold anything back. They give as much as they have, and it goes as far as it needs to go, and it's a miracle. The church is sitting on this dragon's hoard of wealth, and they really could be making huge steps forward. They could apply that principle of the loaves and the fishes and say, let's have faith. We don't need a rainy day fund. We're going to have faith that the Lord will provide, and there will be crumbs left at the end. And we're going to throw all our money, not at buying real estate, but at helping the victims of abuse and putting in place the right sorts of policies, procedures, infrastructure, change that will mean that we are a safe place to be as an organisation for future generations to come. That's a fantastic way to apply that loaves and fishes story when we're talking about abuse and conflict and pain in the same talk. But instead, no, we use it as a pat ourselves on the back. Aren't we good Christians? We're talking about the loaves and the fishes, and we want to be like Jesus. It's just hollow words.
Well, before we go any further, and thank you for that, I need to settle something with someone in the comments, which is Buggerlugs NZ1 is telling me that in New Zealand, Jammy Dodgers is a Shrewsbury biscuit, which it sounds like nonsense. And I'm going to refute it as such, and I want to see a Wikipedia link in the chat immediately.
I've been to Shrewsbury, and there was no Jammy Dodgers there.
Exactly. So I don't know what they're talking about there, but
that's like they call Manchester, don't they, for sheets and linens and things, don't they?
Yeah, well, they have the best screen name of the night. Can I just say that is the most Glaswegian thing that I feel the oneness.
There we go.
Congratulations on that name.
Well, we were talking earlier about how people say they know things, and it's interesting that we were talking about witnesses and testimony and whatever, and they've kind of been avoiding the whole I know thing. But you can tell this guy is kind of maybe, from I say he's from outside the United States, and he's from a place where the church is maybe a bit younger, and they're very much. I mean, you'll see this in on a Sunday also. It's just people say, I know this, I know that. It's like, we actually need to avoid that kind of word, because you can't know that. He can't know that Jesus Christ gave his life, and therefore the eternal consequence is that people have eternal life. You can believe it, but unless you've died and you're somehow able, or you've had someone report back what happens after we die, which please do, if that has happened to you, then you can't know this. You can believe it, and I will defend your right to believe it, and I understand believing it, but we need to get out of saying we know things, because we're conflating belief with knowledge, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, and that's why I think it was dangerous to have that original talk where that guy was talking as a lawyer and saying, when you are bearing testimony in a court, it's what you've seen and what you've heard with your own eyes and ears. So when then someone says, I know, we're thinking, well, has he spoken to the Saviour? Has he sat down with him in a meeting room and had this conversation?
If so, I'd like to see the evidence, please, because RFM makes it very clear what happens when you take a very legalistic approach to the church, and it doesn't do the church any favours. So all these lawyers really ought to stop encouraging us to equate, legal standards of evidence with the church, because it's not going to play well for them. Garrett Gong managed to avoid talking about women's clothes this year, which was excellent. For those of you who don't know, I believe he said something along the lines of, he was telling a story about a young woman on a beach, and a guy went up to her and said, "Why is such an attractive woman wearing such a modest swimsuit?" And she chuckled and went, "Hi, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." So basically, he's telling a story about a guy. He's like, "Why aren't you more slutty?" And she's like, "Well, it's because I have my standards." It's just a weird story. It's just not cool. But he shared it, and he can't take that back. But he managed to avoid that today. What were your thoughts on his talk?
Oh, can I do my objection first?
Yes, please.
So,
Yeah.
objection, Elder Gong. This was incredibly sweet. It was a lovely, sweet talk.
What have you had for your dinner tonight, Jane? Crikey
Oh,
O'Reilly.
guys, by the time I get to the end of this, you will see, it will all become clear, right? No, you see, you start with one of the most fantastic parables of all time, Elder
Gong.
Gong. But
There we go.
it's a Taoist parable. Could you acknowledge when we quote sources, we cite them, and it may be well known in your, but this is commonly used in Buddhism and things as well. Some of the links that he draws to the parable. So it's for those who haven't heard, and you know what, you can all go Google it if you don't know it, but you probably do. It's the one about how there is a man who has a horse, and his horse dies, and then his neighbor comes and talks about how this is unlucky. The man in the Taoist parable says, "Who can say what is good and what is bad?" And then the next thing happens, and he's loaded on his good luck. And again, who can say what is good and what is bad? Now, this goes on for about 20 different scenarios in this man's life. And it's designed not to talk about a binary of the prosperity gospel, which is lovely, but that's not as much what it's about. It's about the fluidity of life, that life is constantly changing. And while Elder Gong does allude to that, it's not in the same way as the parable is designed to help us think about attachment and how attached we are to these things, and should it make any difference to, you know, we love our families and our children, but people die, and we you know, all of these things come to us and we experience them as they come. So it's about radical acceptance and our own attachment. But yes, cite your sources, sir.
Yes, and I've pulled Cook up on that. There's a couple that he cited and talked about. A paper said this, and I'm like, oh, okay, I actually just want to know which one now. But I didn't catch this one, so thank you very much for that, Jane. But you're quite right that story is more about kind of letting go of attachment to the outcome of things and just letting things happen.
Yeah. And it's a
I think
beautiful
it's great.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, and it links in with these sorts of ideas of Stoicism and Buddhist ideas of detachment, and
Right.
there's some real deep sort of philosophical ideas in this story, the depths of which have not been plumbed by Elder Gong this evening, but that's fine.
But there was a lot of good, sweet stuff in it.
Okay.
I mean, he then is going on to talk about something that really, I think, does need clarified for a lot of church members. God does not give trials to punish or judge. That's something worth underlining and worth holding on to for a lot of people who still do have that view. He, you know, that God won't give you a stone if you ask for bread. I would suggest he's maybe not had to view conference from this side, because that is exactly how conference feels.
Yeah.
And then he does this great thing about, you know, he talks about, you know, these words of comfort, platitudes, that when someone's having a hard time, you may say some words that you feel are helpful, but they're actually not very helpful in the moment. And oh my goodness, we've been saying this for years. It was wonderful to hear that from the pulpit.
Ruth?
He talked about the natural man, which I don't feel like we've heard for a little while as a concept. And I feel like that's maybe a little bit of a backward step in some ways, especially because of his own son. And we know that's sort of a sore spot for him. And who was I listening to recently? It was Sam, Self on the Shelf. And she was talking how that's such a dangerous concept that we have baked into Christianity, not just Mormonism, but Christianity, that even from a small child, we're seen to see being natural and authentic and comfortable with ourselves as being a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I really hope we don't go further down that route again of sort of self-loathing and not actually accepting ourselves where we are physically, mentally, and supporting and helping each other along. I think when he used a phrase about facing life with confidence rather than fear, and when I reflected on it, and I know I'm on a bit of a being a bit spicy tonight, but well, I learned that fear from Mormonism.
Yes.
You know, I that fear for my children, the world's a bad place, the fear for the eternities. Will they be with me? What do I need to do to put it right? Um, that fear was learned. That fear was instilled in me. It didn't come from me out. It was loaded onto my back through Mormonism. So I feel like I understand the concept, and it's a lovely concept that we should be facing life with confidence, not fear. But I know where I learned that, and the church needs to do some real reprogramming so that we can have that sort of confidence. And that talk at the beginning was a perfect example of that. If only we could have that more, where we're saying nothing really matters. Prosperity gospel, let it go. It doesn't matter. Health, let it go. It doesn't matter. It will come, it will go, it will ebb and flow. That's the nature of life. And we accept it on the terms that it is. And let's not be materialistic. Can you imagine the church not being materialistic? Crikey, wouldn't it be wonderful?
Yeah.
It would be, wouldn't it? Instead, they go, don't trust yourself because you don't know your own good. And when you
Yeah.
choose yourself, you're actually just choosing a bunch of limitations, weaknesses, and inadequacies.
Yeah.
Isn't that going to make you feel wonderful about yourself? And then one of the other things he said, and this one hurt, and I think Jane can. I thought of Jane when I saw this one. I was like, Jane will get this. Sometimes we yearn for someone who will grieve, ache, and weep with us. Let us express pain, frustration, even anger, and acknowledge with us there are things we do not know. The church is never that for anyone.
No.
The church could be that for its members, but it isn't. And that's deeply upsetting. The church could be, and the church just as an institution, meaning that its local leaders are empowered to have this attitude, that all the way through the leadership structure, they're empowered to have this attitude of being there. They will grieve, ache, weep with us, not just when something bad happens, like someone dies or when we lose a job, whatever, but when we realize something about the nature of the church, when we realize something about the history of the church, when we realize that something about the church doesn't work for us. They will let us express our pain and our frustration and our anger about the church, and they won't try and shut that down. And they will acknowledge that there are things that we do not know, or there are things that they cannot solve. Because acknowledging that and not feeling like they have to make it all perfect and it's our fault for having the problem in the first place would make so many relationships so much better. Jane?
So I want to, and I'll super quickly give a
Mhm.
bit of context to this. So there is a condition that's been written about in a few medical journals, specifically referring to mothers of disabled children like me, and it's they refer to it as chronic sorrow. Now, I stress, as you all know, because I talk about him all the time, I love my child. I love my role in his life and the relationship, particularly that we have. There can also be a tendency to pedestalize and fetishize what he is experiencing. And I would go through my life as a Mormon, waiting for the day when he would be magically cured and that the Savior, if he wanted to heal him, and I could ask for a priesthood blessing, and if that's what the Lord wanted, but I choose not to do that because this is what my son's life looks like. I got to a point where I was experiencing all of this pain and trauma at church and carrying around, um, the language I'm using. I'm very, very aware of my own personal grief. And I remember speaking to a bishop about how I am just so angry in my soul And, he wouldn't even hear it. It's, that's a negative emotion. It's very dangerous. We shouldn't be feeling angry. So we don't have permission to be angry. And women have been seeking, especially women, not to discount men, but women specifically in conversations and online chats have been talking about this overwhelming anger that we are experiencing. So to hear that given voice to is wonderful. Now, in light of everything that I've just said, about how we speak about abilities. We then get to this sort of, I had no other option than to laugh because it was getting ridiculous. We then went through the trials parade. And they were all presented. We had cancer was paraded. It's awful stuff, and all sort of different types of illness. And at some point, I think, oh, they're going to bring in a disabled dog and we'll all start crying. And it was designed just to sort of make us feel really, really, isn't this wonderful? And it's not real. We need the space to be human. We need the space to be able to say cancer sucks. And these things don't necessarily make us stronger. They hurt, they cause pain, and sometimes they absolutely ravage us body and soul. And living is very different if we make it through. They stay away from those types of things. And when it gets too deep about, sort of suicidal ideation, the real experience of so many LGBTQ people, we don't talk about those kind of trials. We need to have a trial, a happy ending, and let's look forward to the celestial kingdom where it will all be good. Now, if we think about these Taoist principles that he's actually starting off with, this is what life is. And it's hard, and it's going to change, and everything changes. That's a much healthier message than let's just wait for everything. There'll be a happy ever after at some point.
Yeah. And he ends with a story about a woman who wants to physically own materialistic
let's get that.
temple clothing. Like, that matters. It just completely the opposite of the sentiment with the Taoist story at the beginning. Why
Ruth,
should it matter?
Could I jump in and just tell you why it does matter? Because I'm so keen to hear your thoughts on this. So I've heard a few discussions, and it's sort of releases, particularly sister missionaries talk about this quite a lot for some reason. I don't know if they're more involved in the discussions, but because we have an aging church population, what we are finding is more and more, particularly women, don't have temple clothing for when it's time for them to be buried, and members of the church are buried in their temple clothing. So if they don't have them, funds have to be used from the ward budget to provide them. So if members have their own temple clothing, this idea that it's saving the temple laundry some work, maybe that might be, on some level true. It's not going to stop a temple laundry because the temple laundry has to function. I would say this is more because the church doesn't want to be spending money on these items.
Who makes and sells these
Yeah.
items?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you've just had him talk to his captive market and say, buy our stuff.
Yeah.
In the name of God, buy our stuff. Carry on, Ruth.
And who says you've got to crawl out of the grave wearing your baker hat? Who says you've got to crawl out of the grave wearing your little green apron? It's all a nonsense. It's Mormon sort of superstitions. It's not part of the temple ceremony that you're going to be buried in these clothing. That the covenants that you're making are between you and God. You're then dead, but we believe in an afterlife. Well, what if you got blown up in an explosion? Does that mean you don't get to come back because you weren't buried in your temple clothing? It's just layers and layers of superstition and nonsense, and people have now made it this thing of you have to be buried in your temple clothes. I was a Relief Society president. The Relief Society sisters will come in and dress the body for you and put those clothes on them for you. It's just folklore and superstition that's been built up over the last 200 years of Mormonism. And I'm sorry, the ward can afford, if somebody wants some temple clothes to put their old mother into, the ward will afford it. I had spare temple clothes as Relief Society president that sat in a drawer, that were there for just that purpose. So that's smoke and mirrors, and I understand why that little old lady was saying that that's her goal. I really want to own my own temple clothes, but I think it shines a light on the mentality, the materialistic mentality of members, where they think that that matters. Actually, what matters is your relationship, surely, with your heavenly Father and your relationship with your family. Because if it's all about the eternities and spending time with the family in the eternities, then why the hell are we calling us? Sorry, I am tired. I'm overtired. Why the hell are we calling a state president who'd obviously got a nice big family with stage 4 cancer? So he's going to be out of the house 4 nights a week when he should be spending quality time with his family, and putting the pressure on him that we want to trot you out like some sort of trick pony for general conference, so we can pat ourselves on the back and say, look at this good guy, stage 4 cancer, and here he is at general conference. Woo!
I wonder if they flew him out or if he had to pay for his own flights.
Yeah,
Let me know what you think in the comments.
Yeah.
Can we jump on to Michael T. Nelson, because I'm aware of the time.
Woo.
And I want to have a
jump onto
I want to have
Michael
a
T.
I want to have a
Nelson.
oh yeah, Jane. All right, we weren't talking about the thirst that you were sending
Jane.
in the chat. For
Oh,
Michael
come
T.
on,
Nelson.
look at that jawline, right?
Once he got
was-
onto Stripling Warriors, she was away.
Right,
Yeah,
that was
but
it.
he didn't blink. He just refused to blink. He didn't
Yeah.
do much though.
He looked a bit panicked.
He reiterated the idea that bishops have discernment, which I wouldn't want to be bringing that idea back up, because bishops and discernment hasn't been doing the church many favors, and it's an argument that doesn't work, and we need to safeguard the youth properly. Again, he's turned the whole ward to focus on the youth, but if we're focusing on the youth, why aren't we safeguarding them properly? Why aren't we background checking people?
But he was
And
really
that's that point.
focusing on just, hey, hold your horses there.
Yeah.
He was. I'm sorry, we've had no women speak. Right, this is our moment. We're taking it.
Yeah.
He was really talking about the young men, and it would have been lovely to see some kind of parity about, if you'd been talking about leadership and mentorship for the young women. Good adults help the youth become good fathers and husbands. We have, he's talking about how to use the technical stuff in the church, the handbook, how to use the online material. This was all about allowing the youth to lead, but there was a very marked difference between, he's in the young men's presidency, obviously that's his job, but it would have been nice to acknowledge there's a whole section of the youth that weren't really being addressed there.
Yeah. Ruth?
I'm conscious of time. I just thought, again, I was concerned for the youth when he was leaning into the spirit of discernment that the bishops are going to hold, and also saying that the Gospel Library and apps is where we get all the resources that we need. They're inspired resources guided by the Spirit. So everything's there. Don't come asking us difficult questions. It's on the app. That was the takeaway for me.
Okay. Right. Before we go to Quinton L. Cook, there's a donor box link in the description if you like what we're doing. Consider becoming a monthly donor. I'm going to be staying up for another several hours. It's gone midnight here currently, and the caffeine hasn't started yet. So if you want to support what I'm doing, that's the way to do it. But the free way to do it is to like and subscribe, so you'll get the little notification for after the next session. Thank you very much. There's 600 odd of you tonight, which is, again, excellent turnout. Well done. I'm almost as popular at conference at this point. I'm not. There's still more Mormons than there are, but we're doing good work. So, Quinton L. Cook, let's start off with my grandfather's primary counsel to me was to avoid any sense of entitlement or privilege because of these faithful ancestors. Let's hear him talk about it. Let's hear a textbook humble brag from Quinton L. Cook, which we've had conference talks about humble brags and how we shouldn't be doing them, and yet
felt deeply about the atonement of Jesus Christ since I was quite young. But the reality of the Savior's atonement came home to me when I was 25. I just graduated from Stanford Law School and was studying for the California bar exam. My mother called and said that my grandfather, Grozier Kimball, who lived in Utah, was dying. She said if I wanted to see him, I had better come home. My grandfather was 86 and very ill. I had a wonderful visit. He was so pleased to see me
Pleased to see
and
you
share his
specifically, was he?
testimony with me. When Crozer was just 3 years old, his father, David Patton Kimball, died at age 44. Crozer hoped that his father and his grandfather, Heber C. Kimball, would approve of his life and feel he had been true to his heritage. My grandfather's primary counsel to me was to avoid any sense of entitlement or privilege because of these faithful ancestors.
So that's why you've just mentioned him, is it? And he loves mentioning them, because check this out.
When I was a little older, when I was 7, my mother gave me this history of Heber C. Kimball. This is the actual book that she gave to me. I didn't read it then. She gave it to me because they were having the 100th anniversary of the coming into Salt Lake Valley, and they had Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball and Wilford Woodruff on that. And Heber C. Kimball was my great-great-grandfather, and she wanted me to know about his history. And this book is written by Orson F. Whitney, a grandson of Heber C. Kimball, and the son of my great-aunt, Helen Mar Kimball Whitney.
Now, I always say it's brave of him to mention Helen Mar Kimball in any sense. But yeah, there he is, Mr. Humblebrag himself. So that's how we started things off. There you go. That was my little cue, just in case I missed it. And then he said, the Lord's saving mercy is not dependent on lineage, education, economic status, or race. It is based on being one with Christ and his commandments. But you know what is based on lineage, education, economic status, or race? Becoming a leader in the LDS Church. That very much definitely is dependent on those things, because we're still yet to see someone who isn't a middle-class professional.
I mean, I see how you went there with leadership, absolutely. But wasn't it, he was sort of talking about baptism and being able
Yeah, no,
to.
he absolutely was. So that's why I'm saying, you know
Oh,
what
no,
isn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
right. And so he's saying that everyone is invited
Mhm.
to partake. Now, you've got it in writing there. Now, am I mistaken, or is one of the conditions for baptism not economic, that you are paying 10% tithing, and that if you
Mhm.
cannot do that, you won't be baptized, right?
Yeah, and
You won't
also,
enter the temple either,
yeah,
right?
quite right. And also, and people will, apologists will argue back and say, this isn't an exhaustive list, but he hasn't mentioned sexual orientation on there.
No, and yeah.
Because it is, apparently the Lord's saving mercy is dependent on that, it would seem.
Yeah, and for a short period of time, it was dependent on your parents' sexual orientation as well, wasn't it?
Yes.
2015.
2015 on, yeah.
Yeah, I think I wrote scribbled in my notes. What's Peter think of this? Because he uses the phrase common consent as well at one
He
point.
did, yeah, because he
Um,
talked about D&C 20 being the first revelation that was accepted by common consent.
and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa! Are we going back there? Are we going to start talking about common consent when we've just relegated the votes to sustain them? And if you don't sustain me, then just let your state president know. I mean, it's just ludicrous, isn't it? But yeah, he went there, and you're absolutely right, Jane. This was about baptism, but this was about all of these things. The Lord's saving mercy, or the invitation for the Lord's saving mercy, is not dependent on any of those things, but there are conduct requirements. So you've got to pay your tithing. You've got to get in line with all of the other requirements of the church to be able to have those things.
So conduct requirements, can I just clarify, in your opinion, that would be you have to not be sinning as it would apply to the church. You're not breaking any of the commandments. Those conduct requirements would be things we don't do rather than things attending meetings and paying tithing. That's it. Would that be correct?
I think there's many more.
Do
And
you?
I
Because
think,
I'm fascinated about where this goes.
yeah, exactly. And I think it depends on who your bishop is. I think it depends on who your state president is. I think
Right.
it depends, are you at BYU? What are the conduct requirements? Have I got to, has somebody got to have their hair above their ears? Are they not allowed to wear
Right.
their hair as it naturally would grow, all of those sorts of things. Suddenly there are conduct requirements, and that then becomes nebulous. So we're all invited, but terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, there's a big asterisk there, isn't there? Can
Yeah.
we have a quick look at these are just a couple of things I wanted to take Jane's lead on, getting him to call out his sources. So some have wrongly encouraged us to imagine people to be much more different from ourselves and from each other than they actually are. Some take real but small differences and magnify them into chasms. Okay, who said that? Who? This is a quote, but from who? The quote is from Peter Wood, his book Diversity, page 20.
He has read the book Diversity. Well, there's a revelation.
Apparently so. On the recent cover of a major university alumni publication, name it. He is like, this is the equivalent. The Mormon Church is the equivalent of those really annoying TV shows where rather than just using Google, and they know everyone uses Google, they make up some stupid fake search engine like We Search, and they have someone searching on it because, I don't know, they can't be bothered to get the rights to use the Google brand or whatever. This is it. On the recent cover of a major university alumni publication, just say which one it is. You're not going to have to pay royalties. Anyway, a prominent biologist professor asserts, again, if you're going to call him out, if you're going to argue with his point of view, have the guts to name him. If you're going to be like, I disagree with him, name him. Not surprisingly, the professor is quoted in the article as saying there's no such thing as God, there's no free will, and this is a vast, indifferent, empty universe. Who is it that he disagrees with? Sam Scott. In an article, As If You Had a Choice, which is from the Stanford alumni publication. So
Didn't
he's
he
reading
go to
high quality.
Stanford? Sorry, didn't he
might
say
have
he
done.
went to Stanford to do his law degree? I just thought he'd have liked the fact that it was an alumni of his
Would that count as
university.
anti-Mormon material that we would be encouraging members to read?
Yeah. And then we got our first Think Celestial of the
We did.
conference.
We got a Think
from-
Celestial. We also got a moral agency, which I think is the replacement for free agency. We're
Yeah.
now talking about moral agency, and he was really keen to hammer that home, wasn't he?
I almost brought up the fact that Bednar says once your agency's enlarged, you don't have a choice anymore. But I thought we're not going to go down that road. But he said that means you don't have a choice not to pay tithing anymore once you've covenanted to do it and all that nonsense. But this one, Jane asked me to put on. So I'll throw it there real quick, and then we'll take closing thoughts on this. Efforts to diminish or depreciate others, or to create deprecate others, or create barriers to their success is contrary to the Lord's doctrine. Jane, what do you make of that?
Okay, so I'm going to run through this because, like I say, the point that I kind of wanted to get to is in here. He's talking about this in the context of pointing out how gender differences, life differences, diversity, all doesn't really matter because we're all God's children. And he gives this sort of warning that, efforts to diminish or depreciate others or create barriers to their success is contrary to the Lord's doctrine. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking about, well, the LGBTQ community are certainly experiencing that. Nemo, have you had an appointment for your temple recommend interview yet? Or are they even going to give you that? I would call those things barriers. Those types of barriers are ultimately, that's what safeguarding boils down to. If there is a barrier to someone living a life where they're able to enjoy all the freedoms with which they are entitled to and enshrined in by law, and even where we need to fight for new laws to make sure that their right to life and how they enjoy their life and experience it needs to be protected, then we fight for those things. That is fundamental, and there are members of the church who are not getting to fully experience that, or people who are experiencing barriers. Last conference, I voted opposed for the first time, just from my own house. And I did it again today. I recorded it, put it in TikTok. Nemo, you recorded yours, and we all got to see that earlier. I expected, like I expect from all general conferences, for there to be just enough to help people to hang in there. And earlier, we got to be treated to the words of Elder Jack Gerard. So I'm just gonna read this because I've got to admit I'm kind of struggling. This is why I was looking for something in this session that I could feel positive that might make a difference. And so I've held on and I sent this email 10 minutes ago. Dear Bishop and President, this conference, specifically the talk given by Elder Jack Gerard, has been a defining moment for me. What he said was in so many ways antithetical to the path I chose when I decided to become a Christian and to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I am heartbroken to be writing these words, but the pain I and others are experiencing gives me no other choice than to formally ask if you would remove my name from the records of the Church with immediate effect. It's my hope that you'll stay in touch. I do love this community and this church. I believe by taking this step, it will align with my personal integrity and my commitment to follow the Saviour's path. When I said the talks are sweet, they were, but they are not sweet enough to be able to undo the harm that is caused. And that's where I am tonight. And I'm so thankful to have a community, all of you guys in the comments who, this has been my community. You are the people that have borne me up, my Brit Vengers mates and things. And I'm so glad that I got to have the space to figure this out with you guys, to sit on it for a little while. That I know this is I can testify that this is the right decision to make. This feels like it brings me closer to my goals and my integrity than to stay. It hurts too much and it feels dirty to stay where I am, and I'm no longer able to do that. So thanks, guys.
My mic's muted. I'm trying to say nice and lovely things, and I've muted
I'm
myself.
trying not to tear up. It's too late in the day.
I'm cold-hearted, as you all know, so I'm just going to keep talking as I
I'm
always have been.
cold-hearted too,
But-
to be honest. Not towards you, Jane, but towards the church. And I was thinking when I can't remember, they were doing the numbers about how many thousands, and I was thinking, yeah, they're still counting me on that list, and I'm going to sit there like a pebble in their shoe, because me staying on that list, yes, they can count it, and I hope it makes them feel good to say that, oh, we've got this many millions of people, but it also means that I can legitimately say, I oppose, my voice still counts. You don't like that it still counts, but it does still count, because unless you want to kick me off, you're still counting me. So while you still count me on your list, my opposed will still count. But I get, Jane, I totally get. You've got to protect your heart. You've got to sit in your own truth, and you've got to do what feels right for you. And I think that's where we are free, this side of the picture, to do different things for the same reason and support and love each other while we're doing that.
Right.
And isn't that powerful? And did we have that permission or that ability when we were fully in? No. We did the equivalent of just sitting sweetly, saying the right things, and yeah, here we are.
I like
Well,
you
thanks.
guys.
Thanks for sharing, Jane. And if people in the chat find themselves in the same position as Jane, feeling like they have to step away from the church, then know that there are communities
We will
out
support
there.
you.
One of the communities that I like to support is Thrive. This is a way to plug that Jane has set up a Thrive event in Scotland, in Glasgow, and that is pretty much a week today. Well, it's actually technically Sunday here now, but it's Saturday.
Yeah, the
the
party's still
13th.
happening. It's both days. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Saturday, 13th and 14th in Glasgow. Tickets are on sale, thrivebeyondreligion.org. So jump on there, grab tickets, come and hang out with me and Jane. We will be there. Ruth, unfortunately, won't be. She's got bigger, better things to do, apparently. But Jane and I will be there, and we'd love to see you there too. If you feel like you need support, community, people that understand you. The reason I go, even though I'm a member of the church, is because I feel welcome in that community and I feel like I can offer something to that community. So don't be surprised that I'm there, but please come along. No matter where you are on your faith journey, if you're still in but trying to work out what to do, then come along. Come and hang out with some people and see what happens. And on that note, I'm going to go have a 20-minute power nap, and I will be back for the next session of conference. And I will light my candle this time because I forgot to light it because, just so much is going on. Such a big weekend. But I'll put the link to Thrive in the description. So sign up I'll see you there. And for those that don't come to Thrive but want to see me virtually, I'll see you in a couple of hours. Whew. Let the caffeine begin. All right, take care, everyone, and I'll see you